Welcome to the Manufacturing Shakeup. We're your hosts, Ellen Feldman-Ornato
and Jenny Drescher. We're talking with dynamic women from across the manufacturing scene in Connecticut.
Friends, have you ever walked into your workplace in the morning and seen somebody walking down the hall and muttered to yourself, wow, they're still here. I can't believe they're still here. And you know it's because this person on a day-to-day basis is doing things that if you did it, you get in a huge amount of trouble for. And somehow they just get away with it. And it makes you think you gotta maybe find another place to work. Jenny, have you ever been in a place like that where persistent bad behavior is the rule of the day?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Been there, done that, got a dozen T-shirts. In all my years working in distribution and import when I was in manufacturing, the things that we would see in those spaces that people got away with were just literally make your jaw drop. There was one incident where I'll never forget. There was a guy on the warehouse floor who just used to walk around name calling, like I won't use the foul language that he used, but he was just sort of this constant agitator of foul language, never anything good enough in the way people performed. Everybody was an a-hole. And it was extraordinary to me that when I first got there, like, how is this even possible? I mean, it was almost surreal. Mm-hmm. It was, wait, this is a workplace? Are you kidding? And I asked about it when I was there. I said, what is the deal with this guy? And he was holding on to all the state secrets. He had all of this knowledge squirreled away. And that was why they kept him. And that was why they tolerated him, because they thought that he couldn't be replaced because he had been there forever. But the truth was that he was this most unbelievably toxic person I think I've probably ever worked with directly was that guy. And I'm going to name him Holger just because that's just a random name that I'm going to call him, but just so I have him to reference because he is a terrible human.
So, we're not going to sit here, obviously, and talk about all of the bad people that we've worked with, because every workplace has its detractors. Every workplace has people who are less than perfect. Heck, we're all less than perfect at times. What we're talking about
I'm less than perfect? Are you serious? Wait.
You are, I promise.
Damn.
So the question is really for you to start to think about, those of you who are driving along or walking along or listening to this on your lunch hour, is how does having that person in your midst over time impact the overall feelings that people have about whether or not your organization is a great place to work? So here's what we know about Connecticut. We have fewer people than we have jobs. There are thousands of manufacturing positions open. And what we know is the better your climate is within your organization, I don't mean your environmental climate, although we just had a great interview with Jen Gaggione talking about like what your physical space is like. What we're talking about is the emotional climate. Is it safe for people to speak up? Do they feel like their ideas are valued? If they come to you with an idea, how is that received? And is the overall climate in your workplace one where people feel like that person that Jenny named, Holger, is he the exception or is he the norm? And if he's the norm, who would want to work there and opt into that? So if you're struggling to attract or you're struggling to retain, very often companies will come to us and they'll say, we have a problem with retention. Our first question after, what do you think is going on? And they say, well, people don't want to work anymore. And generally, it comes down to there's something going on in the internal climate of the organization that is undermining their retention efforts. So, Jenny, in terms of what you've seen, what kinds of things can companies do proactively? And what have we heard from our guests that they were doing proactively to improve or to maintain an excellent culture within their organization?
One of the things that jumped out at me, that actually Paul, our manufacturing czar here in Connecticut, Paul pointed this out, was this idea that we want people to be finding meaning in their work, which sounds very lofty, but if we actually break that down, what that says to me is helping me feel like I am valued for the contributions that I bring to the table. So one of the places that I worked, that I had this strange experience where this was an office role, front office and distribution. And there was a case where they were reordering the roles. And they did it in such a way that they made everybody seem like everybody knew how to do all the same things, and no individual contribution that anyone brought to any particular position really mattered one way or the other. I think the intention behind it was, we want to make sure that we have cross training. We want to make sure that people understand that we will be doing cross training. But how it came across in the communication was, your individual contributions aren't really all that important. And it had this really subtle degrading effect on how people viewed the contributions that they brought into the room. It didn't feel good. It made me feel like a number. This is a huge danger. And I've seen this in other places where how you find meaning in your work can be directly related to the way leadership is communicating the value of what you bring to the table. I mean, I think we have a responsibility to seek value in our own selves, to build our confidence, to recognize our own value, to really amplify that. Like, I have a job between me and me to make sure that I understand my value, but my employer also has a role to play in that, in the way that that is reflected through communication, or things like moving people around from job to job. So I think one of the companies that I think Lesser Evil is doing that well. I remember Jessica Westerfield, when they talked about opening up their second location for Lesser Evil. For those who don't know the episode, Lesser Evil is this amazing popcorn company right here in Danbury, and they've grown so fast, they've exploded in their growth.
Things are popping all over.
That's right.
Pop, pop, pop.
That's right. But one of the things that she talked about was really paying attention to how people felt about making those moves across the organization and into the next level of the organization as they expanded into another facility.
Yeah. And, helping people, I'm going to go back to something you said, which is helping people tie what they do to a greater purpose. We were at a conference for the Center for Automotive Research, right? And a woman and I were having a conversation at a networking session, and she said, it's sometimes why people get very removed from what it is we do and what we make. And she said, one morning on the news, I was listening in the car and I heard a story about a multiple car pileup, and like nobody died because all of the airbags inflated. So people's lives were saved. And in that moment, I realized that was our team. Our team had put in place the most recent iteration of the devices that were going in as a standard into vehicles that caused the airbags to inflate with lesser impact or different impact. She said, I walked in there and I called the whole team together and I said, in case we lose sight of what we do, these little widgets are saving lives every single day. And here's a story of it. So she did a great job as a leader of helping them to remember that even though they were a piece of a much bigger pie, that pie was saving lives. And
you had me at pie saves lives.
Pie saves lives. There we go. There we go.
No. But it's true though. And I wonder if they're doing, you just made me think of another episode that was, I think if we want to have people in our workforce in Connecticut, Paul said, we want people to find meaning in their work. Totally agree with him. We want to make spaces where people can feel like they're bringing their best game to work, they're bringing their best value, they recognize and know their value, and that's being reciprocated. So
Mhm.
what that looks like in terms of hiring and bringing people on is a critical factor. So I cannot help but think of Westminster Tool and Westminster
Mhm.
Tool, Hannah Belmont. Folks, go back and listen to the I never get bored with the Westminster story, for the record.
Right.
I think I've watched the
Mhm.
video on their website about a dozen times and I love it more every time. So what Westminster does is they really look at hiring for fit and hiring for attitude, not hiring for a series of check boxes on the resume. And I know that this is not a new idea, but what I wonder about is how easy is it for a company to actually implement, and what are some of the simple things that we've seen that we could offer our audience that will help them to do that? Does anything come to mind for you?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So there's a book written by Joey Coleman,
Mm-hmm.
and it's called Never Lose Another Employee. And he talks about the fact that the first 50 days that somebody is employed, that there should be a touch point every single day with that person and a very specific onboarding with that person, so that if you spent all your time and money to advertise, to interview, to bring somebody in, to do all the paperwork, to start to get them onto a team, that when they come through the door on their first day and you give them their badge, that should be the very, like, it should be a continuum of engagement for them until they feel grounded with the work that they're doing and the people that are around them. So the extent to which you can do something like that, and you don't have to do it all at once, but there are specific, like noticing what's the average number of days that we're losing somebody. If we feel like we're bringing people in and they're leaving within the first 30 days, what aren't we doing? What are we doing? And what aren't we doing?
Mm-hmm.
That is causing those people to choose to leave after we've invested all that time and energy to get them in. And if we're keeping them and they're staying for years, talking to them and understanding what is it about the culture here that you like, and how do you amplify that, and how do you articulate that to people who might be coming in for an interview, and say, most of our people are here 8 to 10 years, and there's a reason. And this is why, and this is what we hear from them, and that's what we want you to experience. Right. So I think that it's being very intentional about when we're bringing people in. If we have a dearth of available employees here in Connecticut and every other state in the union, by the way, but if we have a dearth of employees, then every single one that we bring in is a rare gem, if you will. And
Mm-hmm.
how do you treat the rare gems so that they stay long enough to become a competent contributor in your workplace? Because if you've got a bull wheel turning people in and out and in and out, there's a problem in the system with how you're onboarding people. That's one thing that I think is a really important touch point for people who are running organizations and thinking about sustaining their workforce, is to look at what are we doing that's working, and what, if we don't think it's working, why not? Without blaming the people who you're bringing in and who are leaving, right? Because you can't control for that. You can't control for what other people do. You can only control on your side of the fence. What
So
do you
you
think?
just used a word that that always makes me laugh. You use the C word, which is culture, right? So culture is such a buzzy word, and we are always very aware of it when we use that word. So culture, and if we just break that down for a hot second, culture is defined in some management circles as how we do things here.
Mhm.
Um, and it makes me wonder about uh, what are where do the present how we do things here of your present workforce, where do those things align with your next workforce, is a question I would invite our leaders out in the world to be considering. And I know that it sounds silly to even say that, because that's all anybody's thinking about and talking about is, how do I pull people in, right? How do I get the next generation? The truth is that what we've seen, this is just a note for all of us to keep in mind, is that these healthy and ethical workplaces that are driven by values, that are driven by people who want to have meaning in their work. In many spaces, folks, that is just table stakes for the next wave of workers, the next generation of workers coming up through our school systems, and kids being born now. So that might be a thing to think about as well, is what are the how we do things here, if we look at that as an intact question. What are the things we're doing that are good? What are the things we might want to be doing to eliminate some of that or push past it?
Right.
There's a lot of room there to make small changes that will work really, really well over the long game.
Yeah. And the other piece that I would say is that there are specific behaviors that great managers and leaders exhibit, and they are learned skills. And as we move people up in our organization from the floor to a supervisor, to maybe a manager, to maybe a senior manager or director, are they getting the developmental support that they need so that they can evolve into the people they need to be to lead others? Right? Because the limit of their development is going to be the place where it cracks and people fall off. Every time somebody goes from a sole contributor to somebody who supervises others and they're not given a toolkit to thrive in that environment, you put your entire group of sole contributors who are now being supervised by somebody who's unprepared at risk. It's a question of, in terms of workplace climate, if we're trying to create a place where everybody can succeed, then that includes the people that we're moving up the food chain to make sure that they succeed so that they don't get overwhelmed and start causing things that need to be repaired. So I think it's a very proactive thing to be looking at your folks and saying, how do we develop this person so that they can thrive in this next position? And not waiting for them to say, I'm not thriving, since most people are very driven to succeed. They love getting the promotion. They appreciate having a new role. It's hard for them to say, I don't really know what I'm doing. And it's a challenge when your norm is to say they'll figure it out because I did. So that's something to think about too, in terms of if you're building a workplace culture, how do you or a place where people can succeed? Let's just call it that. How are you giving people the opportunity to learn the skills?
So I'm going to wrap this episode up and just invite our listeners to try on a couple of key ideas that I'm taking from this conversation. One of which is what are the table stakes that I need to be recognizing as a leader in my own environment? What are the table stakes that are critical for me to start unpacking and really getting at? And then Shake Up Factor 2, I'm going to play with this inside our company, and I invite our friends to do so too, is how am I as a leader helping people find meaning in their work? What are we doing because meaning in our work makes all the difference. So I'm shout out to Paul for bringing that up to us, because I think it's a great question for all of us who lead to be thinking about. So noodle on those little questions on your drive home, friends. Give us a hot message on social media. Let us know, what kind of answers did you come up with? Because the more we can share these kinds of answers, the more we can all help each other to elevate our manufacturing ecosystem right here in our small but mighty Connecticut. So thanks for hanging out today, Elle.
Yeah. And, if you're still listening, be sure to check the show notes here for the link to the book that we mentioned. And also thanks to Jessica Westerfield and Hannah Belmont for being great guests, and go re-listen to their episodes in this context. And I'm sure you'll get a lot more out of it. So thanks. Fun hanging out. The Manufacturing Shakeup is sponsored by the Connecticut Office of Manufacturing, produced by Maselli Productions and Gale Communications, and hosted by the Boulder Company.